Sometimes the hardest battles we face aren't against the storms outside, but the loneliness that settles in our hearts when we think we've been forgotten by the world. For 47-year-old Lydia Murphy, 20 years of mountain solitude had taught her that survival meant depending only on herself. She lived alone in Ridge Valley, Colorado, where winter storms could bury the town for weeks. Her cabin sat at the edge of everything, surrounded by pine trees and endless quiet. That February night, wind shook her windows and snow piled against her door. Then she heard something that wasn't the usual storm sounds, something alive and in pain. She stepped outside with her dog Scout and found a donkey collapsed in the street, half frozen in the snow. No caravans had passed through in weeks. No travelers dared the mountain roads since the blizzards began. So where had this animal come from? And why did its appearance fill her with such unease? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The bitter wind cut through Lydia's thick wool coat as she knelt beside the trembling animal. Snow had accumulated in drifts around the donkey's legs, and ice crystals clung to its dark brown coat like tiny diamonds. The creature's breathing came in shallow, labored puffs that formed small clouds in the frigid air. "Easy now," Lydia whispered, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. She reached out slowly, letting the donkey catch her scent before placing her hand on its neck. The animal's skin felt cold beneath the matted fur, but she could feel the steady rhythm of its heartbeat. Weak but persistent. Scout, her German shepherd, whined softly and pressed closer to Lydia's side. The dog's amber eyes reflected concern as he watched his master examine the strange visitor. Scout had been with Lydia for 8 years, ever since she'd found him as a puppy, abandoned on the same mountain road. He understood suffering. "We need to get you inside," Lydia murmured to the donkey, her breath forming white clouds. She stood and looked toward her barn, calculating the distance. 30 yards through knee-deep snow, but it might as well have been 30 miles. For an animal in this condition, Lydia hurried back to her cabin and retrieved her old medical kit, a worn leather bag that had traveled with her from her nursing days in Denver. The bag contained supplies she'd accumulated over the years, veterinary antibiotics she'd ordered through mail catalogs, bandages, antiseptics, and various tools for treating injured animals. Living in the mountains meant learning to care for everything from injured birds to wounded deer. She also grabbed several thick blankets, a thermos of warm water, and a battery-powered lantern. The storm was intensifying, and she knew they had limited time before the temperature dropped even further. Back outside, Lydia worked methodically. She wrapped the donkey in blankets, securing them with rope to prevent them from slipping. The animal didn't resist, a sign that concerned her. Most donkeys were stubborn creatures, but this one seemed resigned to whatever fate awaited. "Scout, stay close," she commanded, as she fashioned a makeshift harness from climbing rope. The plan was risky. She would guide the donkey while Scout helped by staying on the opposite side, providing additional support. The journey to the barn took nearly an hour. The donkey stumbled frequently, its legs shaking with exhaustion and cold. Twice, Lydia thought they might lose the battle, but each time the animal found the strength to continue. There was something in its eyes, an intelligence that suggested this creature had endured hardship before. Inside the barn, Lydia had prepared a stall with fresh hay and several heat lamps she used for her chickens during severe weather. The space was crude but warm, and she could monitor the donkey while maintaining some protection from the storm. As she helped the animal settle into the stall, Lydia's mind wandered to memories she usually kept buried. 23 years ago, she had been head nurse in the trauma unit at Denver General Hospital. She had saved lives, comforted families, and found purpose in healing others. But that life had ended abruptly when Thomas died. Thomas Murphy had been her husband, her anchor, her reason for believing in tomorrow. They had met when he was brought to her emergency room with a broken arm from a construction accident. His easy smile and gentle humor had won her heart, and within 2 years they were married. He had dreams of finding gold in the Colorado mountains. Stories passed down from his grandfather about fortunes waiting to be discovered. After Thomas's death in the mining accident, Lydia couldn't bear to stay in Denver. Every corridor in the hospital reminded her of the day they brought him in, too late, too broken to save. She'd left everything behind and moved to Ridge Valley, a frontier town where she could disappear into the wilderness and nurse her grief in solitude. The donkey's soft bray brought her back to the present. She knelt beside the animal and began a thorough examination. Its coat was well maintained despite the current condition, suggesting it had been cared for recently. The hooves showed signs of recent shoeing, and there were no obvious injuries beyond exhaustion and mild hypothermia. "You're going to be fine," she told the donkey, stroking its neck gently. "But I wonder where you came from." Ridge Valley was a community of perhaps 200 souls, scattered across the mountain valley in cabins and small houses. The town center consisted of Doc Brennan's medical clinic, Sam Torres's general store, the volunteer fire station, and a small post office that doubled as the town hall. During winter, the population often dwindled as some residents moved to warmer climates or stayed with family in larger cities. Lydia's nearest neighbor was Ida Fleming, a 70-year-old widow who lived about a quarter-mile down the mountain road. Ida had been born in Ridge Valley and had never lived anywhere else. She knew every family's history, every secret, and every story worth telling. If anyone would know about a missing donkey, it would be Ida, but tomorrow would be soon enough for questions. Tonight, Lydia's focus remained on keeping her unexpected guest alive. She prepared a mixture of warm water with a small amount of sugar and salt, a simple electrolyte solution she had learned to make during her nursing years. The donkey drank eagerly, a positive sign that its survival instincts remained strong. As the hours passed, Lydia found herself talking to the animal. It was something she rarely did with Scout, preferring the comfortable silence that had defined her mountain existence. But this donkey seemed different, more responsive, more aware of her words. "I used to talk to patients when they couldn't talk back," she admitted, adjusting one of the heat lamps. "Coma patients, mostly. The doctors said it didn't matter, but I always believed they could hear me somewhere inside." The donkey's ears twitched, and it turned its head slightly toward her voice. "Thomas used to say I could talk to anything. Animals, plants, even rocks if I set my mind to it. He said it was my gift." She paused, surprised by the ease with which his name had come. She rarely spoke of Thomas aloud anymore. By dawn, the storm had begun to subside. The donkey was standing and had eaten some hay, though it still seemed weak. Lydia had dozed fitfully in a chair beside the stall. Waking frequently to check on her patient, Scout had remained vigilant throughout the night, positioning himself where he could watch both the barn entrance and the donkey. The dog's protective instincts had grown stronger over the years, perhaps sensing that Lydia was his only family, just as he was hers. As morning light filtered through the barn windows, Lydia noticed something she had missed in the darkness. The donkey's hooves showed unusual wear patterns, not the typical wear of a pack animal or farm worker, but the distinctive markings of long-distance travel over rocky terrain. She knelt and examined the hooves more carefully. There were small stones embedded in the soft tissue around the shoes, and the wear patterns suggested the animal had traveled significant distances recently. But from where? The nearest towns with livestock were at least 50 miles away, and the mountain passes had been closed by snow for weeks. More puzzling was the donkey's calm demeanor. Most animals in distress showed signs of fear or agitation, but this one seemed almost resigned, as if it had been through similar experiences before. Lydia stood and brushed hay from her jeans. 20 years of mountain living had taught her to pay attention to details that didn't fit the expected patterns. Weather changes, animal behaviors, even the way smoke rose from chimneys could provide important information about what was happening in the wider world. This donkey represented a puzzle that challenged everything. She thought she knew about her isolated corner of the world. In her experience, Mysteries in the mountains usually had simple explanations: lost hikers, injured wildlife, or equipment failures. But something about this situation felt different. She gathered her medical supplies and headed back to the cabin. Scout followed, but kept looking back toward the barn, as if he too sensed there was more to this story than a simple rescue. Inside her kitchen, Lydia prepared breakfast while considering her options. She could ask around town about missing livestock, but that would require conversations she typically avoided. She could simply care for the donkey until spring and then find it a proper home. But the animal's mysterious appearance nagged at her sense of logic. Through her kitchen window, she could see the barn where her unexpected guest rested. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of pristine white snow and brilliant blue sky. It was the kind of morning that usually brought her peace. But today, she felt unsettled. Something had changed in her carefully ordered world. And Lydia Murphy was beginning to realize that the donkey's arrival might be just the beginning of a much larger disruption to the quiet life she had built in the shadow of the Colorado mountains. 3 days had passed since the storm, and the donkey, whom Lydia had begun calling Bruno for lack of a better name, had made a remarkable recovery. His appetite had returned, and he moved around the stall with increasing confidence. But it was while grooming him on the third morning that Lydia made a discovery that would shatter her carefully constructed peace. Hidden beneath the thick winter coat, secured against Bruno's belly with leather straps, was a torn saddlebag she had somehow missed during her initial examination. The bag was old but well-maintained, made of quality leather that had been treated to resist weather. It hung flat against the donkey's side, camouflaged by the animal's dark coat and the way he had been lying when she found him. Lydia's hands trembled slightly as she unbuckled the straps. Bruno stood patiently, as if he understood the importance of what was happening. Scout watched from the stall entrance, his ears pricked forward with interest. The saddlebag opened to reveal 3 items that made Lydia's breath catch in her throat. The first was an old photograph, creased and faded, but still recognizable. It showed a group of men standing in front of a mine entrance, their faces serious beneath the brims of their hats. Mining equipment was visible in the background, and someone had written Copper Ridge Mine, 1985 in faded ink on the back, but it was one of the faces in the photograph that sent ice through Lydia's veins. Third from the left, his young face bright with optimism, stood Thomas Murphy. Her Thomas, 20 years younger but unmistakably the man she had married and lost. The second item was a hand-drawn map, sketched on what appeared to be surveyor's paper. It showed the Ridge Valley area with remarkable detail, including several locations marked with X's. The largest X was positioned directly over the old Copper Ridge mine, about 15 miles northeast of town. Other markings indicated trails, water sources, and what looked like equipment caches. The third item made her hand shake even more: a brass compass, tarnished with age, but still functional. Engraved on the back in Thomas's distinctive script were the words, "For my mountain woman, may you always find your way home." Lydia sank onto a hay bale, the items scattered across her lap. Thomas had given her that compass during their second year of marriage, when they had hiked together through these same mountains. She had carried it on every trail until the day he died, and then packed it away with his other belongings, unable to bear the daily reminder of their shared adventures. But this compass was different, older, more worn, as if it had seen years of hard use since Thomas's death. How was that possible? Thomas had died 15 years ago in a mining accident at a completely different site, nearly 100 miles away. The official report had been clear: equipment failure, cave-in, no survivors recovered. Bruno nudged her shoulder gently, bringing her back to the present moment. She looked into the donkey's intelligent eyes and saw something she hadn't noticed before: a deep sadness, as if the animal carried its own burden of loss. "Who sent you to me?" she whispered, stroking Bruno's neck. "And why now?" The sound of a truck engine broke the morning silence. Through the barn window, Lydia could see Doc Brennan's old Ford pickup making its way up her driveway. She quickly gathered the items from the saddlebag and tucked them into her coat pocket. Though she wasn't sure why secrecy seemed important, Doc Brennan was in his 60s, a thin man with kind eyes and hands that had delivered half the babies in Ridge Valley. He had been Thomas's friend and had helped Lydia through the darkest days after the accident. His visits were rare but always welcome. "Morning, Lydia," he called as he climbed out of his truck. "Heard you had some excitement during the storm." "News travels fast in a small town," she replied, stepping out of the barn to meet him. Scout trotted alongside, tail wagging at the sight of one of his favorite visitors. "Ida Fleming mentioned you found a donkey. Figured I'd stop by and see if you needed any veterinary supplies." Doc Brennan's eyes crinkled with humor. "Been a while since we've had anything more exotic than lost cats and injured chickens." Lydia led him into the barn, grateful for the distraction from her troubling discovery. Doc Brennan examined Bruno with the same careful attention he gave his human patients, checking teeth, eyes, and overall condition. "Healthy animal," he concluded. "Well fed, recently shod, and clearly accustomed to human contact. This isn't some wild burro that wandered down from the high country." "That's what I thought." Lydia hesitated, then decided to share part of her concern. "Doc, have you heard about any missing livestock in the area? Or maybe travelers who might have gotten caught in the storm?" Doc Brennan straightened and gave her a look she couldn't quite interpret. "Why do you ask? Just seems odd that a well-cared-for animal would appear out of nowhere during a blizzard." He was quiet for a long moment, stroking his chin in a gesture she remembered from childhood visits when he had been her family's doctor. Finally, he spoke carefully. "Lydia, there have been some strange happenings around the valley lately. Nothing I can put my finger on, but..." He glanced around the barn as if checking for eavesdroppers. "I've treated a few injuries over the past month that didn't match the stories I was told about how they happened." "What kind of injuries?" "The kind you see in industrial accidents. Cuts from machinery, chemical burns, that sort of thing. But the folks who came in claimed they were from ranch work or household mishaps." He paused again. "And I've noticed more strangers passing through town than usual. Men in expensive vehicles asking questions about property records and old mining claims." The items in Lydia's pocket seemed to grow heavier. "Mining claims?" "Including some around the old Copper Ridge site." Doc Brennan's eyes met hers. "That's why I'm asking about your donkey. If someone's been up in those mountains recently, they might have lost equipment or livestock." Lydia felt her carefully controlled world beginning to shift. "Doc, what really happened to Thomas?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. His expression grew troubled, and he looked away from her direct gaze. "The official report said equipment failure. Cave-in. Why are you asking? You were his friend. Did you ever have doubts?" Doc Brennan sighed deeply. "Thomas came to see me about a week before the accident. Said he'd discovered something at the mine where he was working. Something that was making him nervous. He wouldn't give me details, just said he was thinking about contacting federal authorities." "Federal authorities? About what?" "He suspected safety violations, maybe worse. Said the company was cutting corners that could get people killed." Doc Brennan's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "But then the accident happened, and I figured maybe he'd been right to be worried." "But you never reported what he told you?" "Who would I report it to?" "The local sheriff took the company's word about equipment failure." "Case closed." He studied her face carefully. "Lydia, why are you asking these questions now?" Before she could answer, Scout began barking urgently. Both Lydia and Doc Brennan turned to see a black SUV making its way up her driveway, a vehicle neither of them recognized. "Expecting company?" Doc Brennan asked quietly. "No." Lydia's hand instinctively moved to the pocket containing the saddlebag items. "No, I'm not." The SUV stopped near Doc Brennan's truck and two men got out. They wore dark coats and moved with a precision that suggested military or law enforcement background. The driver was tall and lean with graying hair, while his passenger was younger and broader, with the kind of build that came from serious weight training. "Ms. Murphy?" the older man called out as they approached. "We're investigating reports of missing property in the area. Mind if we ask you a few questions?" Doc Brennan stepped slightly closer to Lydia, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by either visitor. What kind of property? Lydia asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Livestock. We understand you might have found a donkey during the recent storm. The younger man's eyes had already found Bruno through the open barn door. That would be the animal in question. I found an injured donkey and provided veterinary care, Lydia said carefully. Are you here to claim it? We're here to recover property that belongs to our employer, the older man replied. His tone was polite, but carried an underlying firmness that made Scout grow tense. And who might that be? Doc Brennan interjected. The two men exchanged a glance before the older one answered. Mountain Development Corporation. We're conducting mineral surveys in the area, and this animal wandered away from our base camp. Lydia felt her pulse quicken. I'll need to see some identification and proof of ownership before I release any animal. Of course. The man reached into his coat, and Lydia noticed that Doc Brennan tensed slightly. But he only withdrew a business card and what appeared to be a bill of sale. As Lydia examined the documents, her mind raced. The business card looked legitimate, but the bill of sale was recent, dated just 2 days ago. If these men had owned Bruno before the storm, why was the paperwork so new? I'll need some time to verify this information, she said, handing the papers back. The younger man stepped forward slightly. Ma'am, we'd prefer to settle this quickly. We have other equipment to recover. Other equipment? Items that may have been lost during the storm, the older man explained smoothly. Nothing valuable, just survey tools and camping gear. Lydia's hand moved unconsciously to her pocket again. I haven't found anything except the donkey. We'd appreciate it if you'd contact us immediately if anything turns up. The older man handed her another business card. Day or night. After the men left, Doc Brennan and Lydia stood in silence for several minutes. Finally, the doctor spoke. Those weren't mineral surveyors. No, Lydia agreed quietly. They weren't. As she watched the black SUV disappear down the mountain road, Lydia realized that Bruno's arrival had brought more than just an injured animal to her doorstep. The donkey carried secrets, secrets that someone was very interested in recovering, and those secrets were somehow connected to Thomas. That evening, after Doc Brennan had left, with promises to keep his eyes and ears open, Lydia found herself unable to settle into her usual routines. The items from Bruno's saddlebag lay spread across her kitchen table, like pieces of a puzzle she was afraid to solve. She picked up the compass again, turning it over in her hands. The engraving was definitely Thomas's work. She recognized the careful, precise lettering that had marked all his personal projects. But the wear on the metal, the scratches and tarnish, told a story of use that should have been impossible. Thomas had died 15 years ago. This compass should have been packed away with his other belongings in her storage room, not hanging around the neck of a mysterious donkey. The photograph troubled her even more. She had never seen it before, yet there was Thomas, young and smiling, standing with men she didn't recognize, in front of a mine she had never heard him mention. The date on the back, 1985, would have been during their first year of marriage. When Thomas was working construction jobs around Denver, he had never mentioned working at Copper Ridge Mine. Lydia walked to the old cedar chest where she kept Thomas's belongings. She hadn't opened it in years. But now she needed to search for answers among the memories she had carefully preserved. The chest contained the usual artifacts of a shared life. Photographs from their wedding and honeymoon. Letters he had written during the brief periods when work took him away from home. His favorite flannel shirts that still carried the faint scent of the cologne he wore. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was his mining journal. Thomas had been meticulous about recording his work experiences, believing that each job site taught him something valuable for his dream of eventually striking out on his own. The journal contained detailed notes about equipment, safety procedures, and geological observations from every site where he had worked. Lydia opened the journal with trembling hands and began searching for any mention of Copper Ridge. She found it on page 47. In Thomas's careful handwriting, March 15th, 1985, started work at Copper Ridge Mine today. Something doesn't feel right about this operation. Equipment is old, Safety protocols are minimal, and the foreman keeps pushing us to work faster than is safe. The other workers seem nervous, especially the older guys who've been here longer. March 22nd, 1985. Found evidence of previous mining activity that isn't on any of the official surveys. Looks like someone's been extracting materials here for years without proper permits. Asked Jim Peterson about it. He's been here 6 months. And he told me to keep my mouth shut if I wanted to keep my job. March 30th, 1985. Discovered what appears to be a secondary operation running parallel to the official mining. Different equipment, different crews working night shifts. When I tried to ask questions, the foreman told me my contract was being terminated for attitude problems. The entries stopped there, but Lydia found a loose page tucked into the back of the journal. The handwriting was more hurried, less careful. Someone's been following me since I left Copper Ridge. Black pickup truck with tinted windows. Same vehicle for 3 days now. I think they know I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. Going to contact the Federal Mining Safety Office tomorrow. If something happens to me, the evidence is hidden in the old hunting cabin near Bear Creek. Lydia, if you're reading this, be careful who you trust. Lydia's hands shook as she read the final words. Bear Creek was only about 20 miles from Ridge Valley, in an area where Thomas used to hunt before they were married. She had never known about any evidence or any hunting cabin. The implications were staggering. Thomas hadn't died in a random mining accident. He had been investigating illegal activity at Copper Ridge Mine and had been silenced for it. The journal entry was dated just 2 weeks before his death, but that raised even more questions. If Thomas had hidden evidence 15 years ago, why was someone looking for it now? And how did Bruno the donkey fit into a story that should have ended with Thomas's death? A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Scout's ears perked up, but he didn't bark, a sign that the visitor was someone familiar. Lydia quickly gathered the journal and saddlebag items. Hiding them in a kitchen drawer before answering the door, Ida Fleming stood on her porch, holding a covered casserole dish and wearing an expression of motherly concern. "Thought you might like some company tonight," Ida said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "And I brought beef stew. You look like you haven't been eating properly." Ida was one of the few people in Ridge Valley who could get away with such direct observations. At 70, she had earned the right to speak her mind, and her genuine care for her neighbors was unquestioned. "That's very kind of you, Ida." Lydia accepted the dish gratefully. "Would you like some coffee?" "I'd prefer tea if you have it. Coffee keeps me awake, and at my age, sleep is precious." Ida settled into Lydia's favorite armchair, as if she belonged there. "Now, tell me about these visitors you had today." Lydia shouldn't have been surprised that Ida already knew about the men in the black SUV. Information traveled through Ridge Valley with remarkable speed, especially when it involved strangers asking questions. They claimed to be mineral surveyors looking for their lost. Donkey, mineral surveyors. Ida's tone made it clear what she thought of that explanation. "And I suppose they had all the proper paperwork?" "They had documents, but something felt wrong about the whole situation." Ida accepted a cup of tea and studied Lydia's face carefully. "Child, you look like you've seen a ghost. This is about more than just a lost donkey, isn't it?" Lydia hesitated. Ida had been kind to her over the years, but sharing the contents of the saddlebag would mean revealing secrets that might put the older woman in danger. "Ida, what do you remember about Thomas's accident?" The question clearly caught Ida off guard. She set down her teacup and considered her words carefully. "I remember thinking it was strange that such an experienced miner would make the kind of mistake that supposedly caused the cave-in." Ida's voice was gentle but firm. "Thomas was always careful, always thinking about safety. It wasn't like him to take unnecessary risks. Did you ever share those thoughts with anyone?" "Who would I tell?" The sheriff accepted the company's report, and Thomas was gone. Asking questions wouldn't bring him back. Ida leaned forward slightly. "Why are you asking about this now?" Before Lydia could answer, they heard the sound of vehicles outside. multiple engines, moving slowly up the mountain road. Scout began growling low in his throat, and both women moved to the window. 3 sets of headlights were visible through the trees, coming from the direction of town. The vehicles were moving in formation, maintaining careful spacing between them. "That's not normal traffic," Ida whispered. Lydia quickly turned off the interior lights and motioned for Ida to move away from the window. They watched as the vehicles, all dark SUVs, similar to the one from earlier, continued past Lydia's driveway and headed toward the old mining road that led to Copper Ridge. "They're going to the mine," Lydia said quietly. "At night, in this weather?" Ida shook her head. "No legitimate mining operation runs night shifts in conditions like this." After the vehicles had passed, Lydia made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. She retrieved the items from the kitchen drawer and showed them to Ida. The older woman examined each piece carefully, her expression growing more troubled as she understood the implications. "This changes everything," Ida said finally. "If Thomas was investigating illegal mining operations, and if someone killed him to keep him quiet, then Bruno didn't appear by accident," Lydia finished. "Someone wanted me to find these items, but who? And why now?" Lydia looked toward the barn where Bruno was safely settled for the night. The donkey had brought her a message from the past, but she was beginning to realize it might also be a warning about the present. "I think," she said slowly, "that someone else was investigating what Thomas started. And I think that person is in just as much danger as Thomas was." The sound of distant machinery drifted down from the direction of Copper Ridge Mine, confirming that whatever was happening up there was definitely not legitimate mining activity. Lydia Murphy was about to discover that some secrets refused to stay buried, and that the truth about her husband's death was only the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous story. The next morning brought a discovery that sent chills through Lydia's entire being. While grooming Bruno, her fingers encountered something unusual, tangled in his mane. A small object that had been carefully woven into the hair near his neck. It was a hand-carved wooden cross, no bigger than her thumb, made from what appeared to be pine wood. The carving was simple but elegant, with Thomas's initials TM etched into the base in the same careful script she recognized from their wedding album. Lydia sank to her knees in the straw, the tiny cross trembling in her palm. This wasn't just another artifact from Thomas's past. This was something he had made with his own hands, something personal and meaningful. She remembered watching him carve similar pieces during quiet evenings at their kitchen table, his strong hands working the wood with infinite patience. But Thomas had been dead for 15 years. How could his carving be in the mane of a donkey that had appeared during a blizzard? The emotional impact hit her like a physical blow. For the first time since that terrible day when they brought Thomas's body down from the mountain, Lydia wept openly. All the grief she had carefully contained, all the love she had packed away with his belongings, all the dreams they had shared, everything came flooding back with the force of an avalanche. Bruno seemed to sense her distress. The donkey lowered his head and gently nuzzled her shoulder, offering the kind of comfort that only animals seemed capable of providing without judgment or expectation. "Who sent you to me?" she whispered through her tears. "Who wanted me to know?" After composing herself, Lydia walked to Ida Fleming's house with the wooden cross in her pocket. She needed to talk to someone who had known Thomas, someone who might remember details about his death that had been overlooked or dismissed. Ida's cabin was a testament to a lifetime spent in Ridge Valley. The walls were covered with photographs spanning decades, family gatherings, town celebrations, seasonal changes in the mountain landscape. It was a visual history of a community that had endured through good times and hardships. "You looked like you didn't sleep much," Ida observed as she poured coffee for both of them. "I found something else." Lydia showed her the wooden cross, explaining where she had discovered it. Ida held the tiny carving up to the morning light streaming through her kitchen window. "I remember Thomas making these. He gave them to people he cared about, friends, neighbors, anyone who was going through difficult times. But this one has his initials. That means it was special to him. He only marked the ones he made for family. Ida's eyes met Lydia's. "This was meant for you. But how did it end up in that donkey's mane?" Ida was quiet for a long moment, studying the cross as if it might reveal its secrets. Finally, she spoke in a voice that carried the weight of years and difficult truths. "Lydia, I need to tell you something I should have shared years ago. I had doubts about Thomas's accident from the beginning, but I also had reasons for keeping those doubts to myself." "What kind of reasons?" "The kind that involve protecting people I care about." Ida set down her coffee cup and walked to an old roll-top desk in the corner of her living room. She retrieved a manila envelope that looked like it had been stored away for a long time. "Thomas came to see me 2 days before he died. He was scared, Lydia, more scared than I'd ever seen any man. He gave me this envelope and asked me to keep it safe." Lydia's heart began racing as Ida handed her the envelope. Her name was written on the front in Thomas's handwriting, along with the words, "Only if something happens to me." Inside the envelope were 3 items: a letter addressed to her, a map similar to the one from Bruno's saddlebag, but more detailed, and a small brass key. The letter was in Thomas's careful script. "My dearest Lydia, if you're reading this, then my fears about Copper Ridge have proven justified. I've discovered something terrible happening at the mine, not just safety violations, but criminal activity that reaches far beyond what I first suspected. The mining operation is a front for money laundering connected to drug trafficking. Large amounts of cash are being processed through fake mining equipment purchases and non-existent mineral sales. I have evidence hidden in the old cabin at Bear Creek, but I'm being watched constantly now. I tried to contact federal authorities, but I believe my communications are being intercepted. The local sheriff may be involved. I saw him meeting with the mine supervisors on several occasions. I'm going to try one more time to get this information to the right people. If I don't succeed, the evidence is in a waterproof container buried beneath the cabin's hearth. The map will show you the exact location, and the key opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank in Boulder. Box number 247. Password is your maiden name. I love you more than words can express. If something happens to me, please don't try to investigate this yourself. Take the evidence to the FBI office in Denver and let them handle it. Stay safe, my mountain woman. You are my heart, forever yours, Thomas." Lydia read the letter twice before the full implications sank in. Thomas hadn't just suspected safety violations. He had uncovered a major criminal operation, and he had tried to protect her by hiding the evidence and warning her away from danger. "Why didn't you give this to me 15 years ago?" Lydia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ida's expression was filled with regret and protective concern. "Because you were barely holding on after his death. You were so broken, so lost. I was afraid that knowing the truth would destroy you completely. But people got away with murder, and if you had tried to investigate then, they might have murdered you too." Ida's voice was firm. "I made a judgment call to protect you. Maybe it was wrong, but I couldn't bear the thought of losing you as well." Lydia studied the map Thomas had drawn. It showed the location of Bear Creek cabin with precise detail, including landmarks and distances. The key felt heavy in her palm, a tangible connection to secrets Thomas had died trying to expose. "The safety deposit box," she said slowly. "Have you ever—" "I've been paying the rental fee anonymously for 15 years, Ida admitted. "I figured someday you might need what was inside." Before Lydia could respond, Scout began barking urgently from outside. Both women moved to the window and saw a familiar black SUV parked at the end of Ida's driveway. The same 2 men from the previous day were walking toward the house. "They found out about our conversation yesterday," Lydia said quietly. "Or they've been watching both of us." Ida's voice carried a note of fear that Lydia had never heard before. The knock on the door was polite, but insistent. Ida looked at Lydia, who nodded. They had nothing to hide except everything. "Mrs. Fleming." The older man's voice was respectful, but carried an undertone of authority. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about livestock that might have been seen in the area." Ida opened the door with the kind of gracious manner that only came from decades of mountain hospitality. "Gentlemen, how can I help you? We understand you're familiar with all the residents in this valley. We're looking for any reports of stray animals or unusual activity in the past week." "Unusual activity is a broad term in these mountains," Ida replied smoothly. Could you be more specific?" The younger man stepped forward slightly. "We're particularly interested in any animals that might have been carrying equipment or supplies." Lydia felt the weight of Thomas's letter in her pocket. These men weren't looking for a lost donkey. They were looking for the evidence Thomas had hidden. "I haven't seen any pack animals," Ida said truthfully, "though I did hear that Lydia Murphy found an injured donkey during the storm. Yes, we spoke with Ms. Murphy yesterday. We're following up on any additional sightings or reports. I'm afraid I can't help you there." Ida's tone remained pleasant but firm. "Was there anything else?" The older man studied both women carefully before responding. "Mrs. Fleming, we understand you've lived in this valley for a long time. You must know a great deal about the local history. I suppose I do, including the history of mining operations in the area." Lydia felt her pulse quicken. The conversation was moving in a dangerous direction. "There have been various mining claims over the years," Ida replied carefully. "Most of them played out or proved unprofitable. What about Copper Ridge Mine specifically? That operation closed years ago after a tragic accident. A worker was killed in a cave-in." "Thomas Murphy," the younger man said, watching Lydia's face for a reaction. "Yes, that's right. Terrible loss for the community." The older man's attention had shifted completely to Lydia. "You must be his widow." "I am. Our condolences on your loss. It must have been difficult losing your husband so young." There was something in his tone that suggested the condolences were anything but sincere. Lydia felt as if she were being evaluated, measured for some purpose she couldn't understand. "If there's nothing else," Ida said firmly, "I have chores to attend to." "Of course. But Mrs. Fleming, if you remember anything about stray animals or unusual activity, please don't hesitate to contact us." The older man handed her a business card. Day or night. After the men left, Ida and Lydia sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Ida spoke. "They know who you are, and they know about Thomas. This isn't about a missing donkey." "No," Lydia agreed. "They're looking for Thomas's evidence, which means someone told them it exists." Lydia thought about the implications. Someone who knew Thomas was investigating the mine. Someone who's been looking for that evidence for 15 years. Or someone who recently discovered that the evidence might surface. The wooden cross seemed to burn in Lydia's pocket. Someone had deliberately sent Bruno to her with Thomas's personal items, knowing she would recognize their significance. But was that person trying to help her or trap her? "Ida, I need to get to that cabin at Bear Creek." "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. If Thomas died to protect that evidence, then I owe it to him to make sure it reaches the right people. And if you die trying to retrieve it, what will that accomplish?" Lydia looked out the window toward the mountains where Thomas had spent his final days. Somewhere up there, hidden beneath the floor of an old cabin, lay the truth about his death and possibly the key to stopping whatever criminal operation had killed him. He left that evidence for me to find. He trusted me to do what he couldn't. He also told you not to investigate it yourself. That was 15 years ago. The situation has changed." Lydia stood and walked to the window. "Bruno didn't appear by accident. Someone wanted me to have those items from the saddlebag. Someone who knows the truth about what happened to Thomas, or someone who wants to use you to find the evidence so they can destroy it." The possibility sent a chill through Lydia, but it didn't change her resolve. Thomas had died trying to expose the truth. She couldn't let his sacrifice be meaningless. As she prepared to leave Ida's house, Lydia made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. She was going to Bear Creek cabin regardless of the danger, but first, she needed to make sure Bruno was safe. If these men were willing to kill for the evidence Thomas had hidden, they wouldn't hesitate to harm an innocent animal that might lead them to it. The wooden cross in her pocket reminded her that some messages transcend death, and some truths demand to be revealed no matter the cost. That afternoon, Lydia spread Thomas's geological survey map across her kitchen table, alongside the hand-drawn maps from both the saddlebag and Ida's envelope. The official document was far more detailed than she had initially realized, showing not just the topography of the Copper Ridge area, but also detailed mineral composition analysis. The survey revealed something that made her breath catch: significant deposits of gold and silver throughout the Copper Ridge Formation, far more valuable than any of the historical mining operations had ever extracted. Thomas hadn't just discovered safety violations, he had found evidence of a systematic effort to extract precious metals from government land without proper permits or environmental oversight. The scope of the criminal operation was staggering. According to Thomas's notes in the margins of the survey, someone was running an illegal mining operation that could be worth millions of dollars annually. No wonder they had been willing to kill to protect their secret. Scout's sudden bark interrupted her concentration. Through the kitchen window, she could see Doc Brennan's truck approaching, but his usual leisurely pace had been replaced by urgent speed. He practically jumped out of the vehicle before it had fully stopped. "Lydia, we need to talk," he called as he approached her door. His face was flushed, and his eyes held the kind of worry she had seen during medical emergencies. "What's wrong?" "I just came from town. Sam Torres wants to sell his store." Lydia frowned. Sam had owned the general store for over 20 years and had often talked about passing it down to his son. "That's not necessarily unusual. He wants to sell it to strangers who offered him 3 times what it's worth, and he wants to complete the sale within the week." Doc Brennan stepped inside and closed the door firmly behind him. "Sam's scared, Lydia, really scared." "Scared of what?" He wouldn't say directly, but he mentioned that people have been asking questions about long-time residents. Specifically, people who might know about historical mining claims, or who might have family connections to previous mining operations. The implications were clear. Someone was systematically pressuring long-time residents to leave Ridge Valley, and they were particularly interested in anyone who might have knowledge about past mining activities. "Doc, how many other people have been approached about selling their property?" "At least 6 families that I know of. All long-time residents, all offered significantly more than market value, all being pressured to make quick decisions." Lydia thought about the pattern. They're trying to control the entire valley, or eliminate anyone who might have knowledge about what's really happening up at Copper Ridge. "Have you been approached?" Doc Brennan nodded grimly. "Yesterday, 2 men in expensive suits offered to buy my practice and my house. Said they represented investors who wanted to develop the area for high-end mountain retreats. The same men who came here about Bruno. No, these were different, but they had the same feel. Polite on the surface, but with an underlying message that refusing their offer might not be wise." Lydia retrieved the geological survey and showed it to Doc Brennan. His expression grew increasingly troubled as he studied the mineral composition data. "This explains everything," he said finally. "If someone's been mining these deposits illegally for years, they've made enough money to buy out the entire valley if necessary, and to eliminate anyone who might expose them." Doc Brennan was quiet for a moment, studying the survey more carefully. "Lydia, there's something else you need to know. I've been keeping records of the unusual injuries I've treated over the past few months. Industrial accidents, chemical burns, respiratory problems, consistent with exposure to mining dust and chemicals." "How many people?" 14 individuals. "All claiming the injuries happened in household or ranch accidents, all paying in cash, all refusing to provide emergency contact information. They're workers at the illegal mining operation. That's my assessment. And if I'm right, then this operation is much larger than Thomas ever suspected." Lydia walked to her window and looked toward the mountains where Copper Ridge lay hidden among the peaks. Somewhere up there, people were working in dangerous conditions to extract precious metals from government land. And the profits were being used to systematically take control of Ridge Valley. "Doc, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, do you think Sheriff Patterson is involved?" Doc Brennan's hesitation was answer enough, but he finally spoke. "I've wondered about that myself. Patterson has been acting strangely lately, avoiding certain conversations, being evasive when I've asked about investigating some of the more serious injuries I've treated. Thomas mentioned in his journal that he suspected local law enforcement might be compromised. If that's true, then we can't trust anyone in an official capacity around here. The sound of multiple vehicles approaching made both of them move to the window. A convoy of 3 black SUVs was slowly making its way up the mountain road. But instead of continuing toward Copper Ridge, they turned into various driveways throughout the valley. They're visiting every house, Lydia observed, looking for something specific. As they watched, one of the SUVs stopped at Ida Fleming's house. 2 men got out and approached her door with the same purposeful stride Lydia had seen before. "They're pressuring everyone systematically," she said. "First the property buyouts, now direct intimidation. We need to warn people." Warn them about what? That there's a criminal conspiracy operating in their backyard and the local sheriff might be involved? Lydia shook her head. Most people will either not believe us or be too scared to act on the information. Doc Brennan was studying the geological survey again. "Lydia, according to this data, the mineral deposits extend far beyond the immediate Copper Ridge area. They cover most of the valley, including the land where many of our neighbors live. So this isn't just about hiding an illegal mining operation. It's about gaining control of all the mineral rights in the region, which means they'll keep pressuring people to sell until they own everything of value." The realization hit Lydia like a physical blow. The criminal organization wasn't just trying to cover up Thomas's murder. They were planning to take over the entire valley and extract every valuable mineral from the land. Her thoughts were interrupted by Scout's urgent barking. Through the window, she could see that one of the SUVs had stopped at her own driveway. But this time 4 men got out instead of 2, and they moved with military precision toward her house. "This isn't a social visit," Doc Brennan said quietly. Lydia quickly gathered the maps and geological survey, stuffing them into a large envelope. "Take these to Ida's house. Use the back trail through the woods so they don't see you leaving. What about you?" "I'm going to find out what they want. Lydia, if these people killed Thomas, then they're going to have to deal with his widow." As Doc Brennan slipped out the back door with the evidence, Lydia took a deep breath and prepared to face whatever these men had come to discuss. Scout positioned himself beside her, his protective instincts clearly engaged. The knock on her door was firm and authoritative. "Ms. Murphy, we need to discuss your donkey and any items you may have found with it." Through the window, she could see that the 4 men had positioned themselves strategically around her house. This wasn't a request, it was a search operation. "I've already told your colleagues everything I know," she called through the door. "New information has come to light." "Please open the door." Lydia realized she had reached a crossroads. She could cooperate and hope they would leave her alone. Or she could continue pursuing the truth about Thomas's death and risk everything. The wooden cross in her pocket seemed to pulse with warmth, reminding her that some battles were worth fighting regardless of the odds. She opened the door. The man standing at her door was different from the previous visitors. Older, with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much violence. His expensive coat couldn't hide the predatory alertness that marked him as someone accustomed to getting what he wanted through intimidation. "Ms. Murphy, I'm Robert Crane. I believe you have something that belongs to my organization, such as items that were in the possession of an animal you've been caring for. Items that were stolen from our operation." Lydia kept her expression neutral despite her racing heart. "I found an injured donkey and provided veterinary care. Nothing more." Crane stepped inside without invitation, and Lydia noticed that his 3 companions had positioned themselves to block any escape routes. Scout growled low in his throat, sensing the threat these men represented. "Miss Murphy, let me be direct. We know your husband was investigating our business interests 15 years ago. We know he removed certain materials from our property, and we know that someone recently used your donkey to deliver those materials to you. My husband died in a mining accident. Your husband died because he couldn't mind his own Business. Crane's voice carried no emotion. As if discussing the weather. We're hoping you're more reasonable than he was. The casual admission of murder sent ice through Lydia's veins, but it also strengthened her resolve. These people had killed Thomas, and they were threatening her now with the same cold calculation. What do you want? Maps, documents, photographs, anything your husband might have hidden. In return, we'll make you a very generous offer for your property and ensure your safe relocation anywhere you'd like to go. And if I refuse? Crane's smile was devoid of warmth. Let's not discuss unpleasant alternatives when we can reach a mutually beneficial agreement. One of his companions had begun searching her living room, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Another was checking her kitchen, looking for hiding places where documents might be concealed. You won't find anything here, Lydia said truthfully. Doc Brennan had taken the maps and surveys to safety. Perhaps not. But we will find what we're looking for, Ms. Murphy. If not here, then in other locations your husband might have used. We have all the time in the world and unlimited resources, the searcher in her kitchen called out. Nothing obvious here, but we should check the barn and outbuildings. Of course, Crane turned back to Lydia. We'll also need to examine your donkey more thoroughly. If it was used to transport materials, there might be additional items we missed. The thought of these men handling Bruno filled Lydia with protective fury. The donkey had become more than just an animal to her. He was a connection to Thomas, a living link to the truth she was determined to uncover. The animal is recovering from severe injuries. Any stress could cause a setback. We'll be careful. But Lydia could see in Crane's eyes that they would be anything but careful. If Bruno had additional evidence hidden somewhere on his body, they would find it regardless of the cost to the animal. As the men prepared to search her barn, Lydia made a desperate decision. There is something you should know. Crane paused, his attention fully focused on her. I found some items in the donkey's saddlebag, documents and maps. But I've already contacted federal authorities. It was a lie, but she hoped it might buy time, or at least make them reconsider their plans. Crane's expression didn't change, but she noticed his hand move slightly toward his coat. What exactly did you tell them? Everything. About Thomas's investigation, about the illegal mining operation, about the threats to local residents. And when did you make this contact? Lydia realized she was walking a dangerous line. If her lie was too detailed, they would easily verify it was false. But if it was too vague, they wouldn't take it seriously. This morning, I called the FBI office in Denver. One of Crane's companions whispered something in his ear. Crane nodded and turned back to Lydia. Miss Murphy, we've been monitoring communications in and out of this valley for weeks. No calls have been made to any federal agencies from your phone or anyone else's in Ridge Valley. The revelation that they were intercepting phone communications was terrifying. But it also explained how they had stayed ahead of any attempts to contact outside authorities. Then you know I'm not bluffing. What I know is that you're lying. Crane's voice hardened, which suggests you're either very brave or very foolish. In my experience, brave people who interfere with our business don't remain brave for very long. The searcher in her kitchen returned with news that made Lydia's blood run cold. Found fresh tire tracks behind the house. Someone left recently, probably within the last hour. Crane's eyes narrowed. Who was here, Miss Murphy? I don't know what you're talking about. Doc Brennan's truck was seen leaving your driveway as we arrived. What did you give him? Lydia remained silent, but her mind raced. If they knew Doc Brennan had been here, they would go after him next. And if they suspected he had taken evidence, they would use whatever methods necessary to retrieve it. Search the barn thoroughly, Crane instructed his men, and check every inch of that donkey. If there's anything else hidden, find it. As the men headed toward her barn, Lydia made another desperate gambit. You're making a mistake. The evidence you're looking for isn't here. Where is it? Hidden somewhere you'll never find it. Thomas was smarter than you gave him credit for. Crane studied her face carefully. You're referring to the cache at Bear Creek Cabin. The fact that he knew about the cabin sent shockwaves through Lydia. If they knew about Thomas's hiding place, they might have already retrieved the evidence, or worse, they might be using that knowledge to set a trap. We found that location years ago, Crane continued. Unfortunately, the cache had been moved before we could recover it. We've been waiting for someone to lead us to the new location, and you think I know where it is? I think your donkey was sent by someone who does know. Someone who's been playing a very dangerous game with information that doesn't belong to them. The sound of Scout's furious barking from the direction of the barn interrupted their conversation. Lydia could hear Bruno braying in distress, and she knew the men were frightening him during their search. "Call off your dogs," she demanded, "when we find what we're looking for." A new voice called from outside. "Mr. Crane, you need to see this." One of the searchers emerged from the barn, holding something that made Lydia's heart sink. Thomas's wedding ring. Tarnished and dirty as if it had been buried for years. "Found this tied in the donkey's tail," the man reported. "Looks like there's an inscription." Crane examined the ring carefully. "Thomas Murphy, beloved husband. July 15th, 1982. He looked at Lydia with cold satisfaction. "This ring was buried at the mine entrance 15 years ago as a message to anyone who might try to continue your husband's investigation. Someone dug it up recently and planted it on your donkey. The psychological manipulation was devastating. Someone had desecrated Thomas's burial site to send her a message, using his wedding ring as both evidence and threat. Who would do such a thing?" she whispered. "Someone who wants you to find what your husband hid. Someone who's been using you as an unwitting accomplice in their own agenda." Crane pocketed the ring, and Lydia realized with growing horror that she might never see it again. "Miss Murphy, you have until tomorrow morning to decide whether you're going to help us voluntarily or whether we'll need to employ more persuasive methods. I suggest you think carefully about your options." As the men prepared to leave, Crane delivered one final message that left no doubt about the stakes involved. "Your husband thought he was being heroic when he tried to expose our operation. Instead, he simply demonstrated the consequences of interfering with forces beyond his understanding. I hope you're wiser than he was." After they left, Lydia collapsed into her kitchen chair, overwhelmed by the realization that she was facing the same people who had murdered Thomas. But she was also filled with determination that his death would not be meaningless. Someone had sent Bruno to her with evidence for a reason. Someone was trying to help her expose the truth, even if their methods put her in terrible danger. The wooden cross in her pocket reminded her that some fights were worth the risk, and that Thomas's courage lived on in her decision to continue what he had started. That evening, as darkness settled over Ridge Valley, Lydia sat in her barn with Bruno, trying to process everything that had happened. The donkey seemed to sense her distress and had grown increasingly restless since Crane's men had searched him. Every few minutes he would look toward the barn door, as if expecting someone to arrive. Scout paced nervously, his usual calm demeanor replaced by an alertness that suggested he too felt the danger surrounding them. The dog had positioned himself where he could watch both the barn entrance and Bruno, as if understanding that protecting the donkey was now part of his duty to Lydia. As she gently brushed Bruno's coat, trying to calm both the animal and herself, her fingers encountered something the searchers had missed, a small, hard object sewn into the lining of a leather collar that was nearly hidden beneath his thick winter hair. Working carefully, Lydia managed to extract the object without cutting the collar. What she found in her palm made her question everything she thought she understood about Bruno's arrival. It was a federal law enforcement badge, tarnished but clearly authentic. The name on the badge read Agent Maria Reeves, DEA. Below the name was a badge number and the seal of the Drug Enforcement Administration. Lydia stared at the badge in shock. Bruno hadn't belonged to mineral surveyors or mining workers. He had belonged to a federal agent, an agent who was now missing, and whose badge had been hidden with the same care Thomas had used to conceal his evidence. With growing excitement and fear, Lydia continued her examination of Bruno's collar. Hidden in a specially designed compartment was a small GPS tracking device, inactive but obviously sophisticated. Next to it was what appeared to be a miniaturized radio transmitter, also powered down but intact. The implications were staggering. Agent Maria Reeves had been conducting an undercover investigation of the illegal mining operation, using Bruno as her cover for surveillance in the remote mountain areas. The donkey had been trained to carry equipment and potentially evidence, moving through terrain where vehicles couldn't travel. But what had happened to Agent Reeves? And why had Bruno appeared at Lydia's cabin, carrying evidence connected to Thomas's death? Lydia carefully activated the radio transmitter, hoping it might provide answers. After several minutes of static, she heard a faint voice transmission, a recording that had been stored in the device's memory. "This is Agent Reeves. Case file DR 2847. Date February 10th. If anyone receives this transmission, I need immediate extraction from the Copper Ridge area. My cover has been compromised, and I believe my life is in immediate danger." The recording continued with coordinates and emergency protocols. But it was the next part that made Lydia's blood run cold. "I've discovered that the mining operation is connected to a major drug trafficking network. Large shipments of processed cocaine are being moved through the mine tunnels and distributed throughout the region. The operation is protected by corrupt local law enforcement and has been running for at least 15 years. Agent." Reeves's voice became more urgent as the recording progressed. "I've also uncovered evidence that Thomas Murphy, the miner who died here in 2010, was murdered because he discovered the drug operation. His death was not an accident, it was a targeted killing to silence a potential witness." Lydia's hand shook as she listened to confirmation of what she had suspected but hoped wasn't true. "I've retrieved additional evidence Murphy hid before his death, including financial records and photographs that can expose the entire network. If something happens to me, the evidence is cached according to the coordinates in this device. My animal is trained to return to specific locations when given proper commands." The recording ended with instructions for activating Bruno's tracking protocols and coordinates for multiple evidence caches throughout the mountains. Agent Reeves had been using the donkey as a mobile storage and retrieval system for gathering intelligence about the criminal operation. As Lydia processed this information, Doc Brennan appeared at the barn door. His face was pale, and his usual calm demeanor had been replaced by obvious fear. "Lydia, we have a serious problem. I just came from Ida's house. What's wrong?" "They took her." The words hit Lydia like a physical blow. "Who took her?" "Crane's people. I saw them loading her into one of their vehicles about an hour ago. She wasn't struggling, but she looked terrified." Lydia felt rage and fear warring in her chest. Ida had been trying to help her, and now she was paying the price for that kindness. "Did they say anything? Leave any message?" "One of them told me to inform you that Mrs. Fleming would be returned safely when you deliver what they're looking for." Doc Brennan's voice was heavy with worry. "Lydia, they're using her as leverage to force you to give them Thomas's evidence. But they don't. Understand, I'm not the only one who's been looking for that evidence." She showed Doc Brennan the badge and explained. About Agent Reeves. His expression grew increasingly troubled as he understood the scope of what they were facing. "A federal agent has been missing for weeks, and no one knows about it? According to the recording, her cover was blown. They probably killed her just like they killed Thomas." Doc Brennan was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "But if she hid evidence in multiple locations and Bruno knows how to find them, then we might have the key to exposing the entire operation." Lydia looked at the GPS device in her hand. "But first, we need to get Ida back safely. How do we do that without giving them what they want?" "We give them what they want, but not what they expect." Lydia activated the GPS device according to Agent Reeves's instructions. A small screen displayed a map of the area with several marked locations. The closest cache was about 2 miles from Lydia's property, hidden in a rock formation that would be accessible even in winter conditions. "Doc, I need you to do something that might put you in danger. Name it. Contact the FBI office in Boulder, not Denver. They might be monitoring communications there. Tell them Agent Maria Reeves is missing and that you have information about her last known location. What about the communications monitoring crane mentioned? Use the emergency radio at the fire station. It operates on different frequencies, and they might not be intercepting emergency service communications. As Doc Brennan prepared to leave, Lydia made her own preparations for what might be her most dangerous gamble yet. She was going to retrieve Agent Reeves's evidence cache, and then she was going to trade it for Ida's life, but she wasn't going to trade the real evidence. Agent Reeves had been smart enough to create multiple caches. Lydia hoped she had also been smart enough to create decoys. Bruno seemed to understand that something important was happening. The donkey allowed Lydia to attach a makeshift pack to his back, and he responded to her guidance with the training that Agent Reeves had obviously invested months in developing. As they prepared to venture into the dark mountains, Scout took his position as their advance scout, his superior hearing and night vision providing early warning of any dangers ahead. The GPS coordinates led them along a trail that Thomas had shown her years ago, a path that wound through dense forest and rocky terrain toward the higher elevations where the old mining claims were located. Bruno moved with sure footing despite the snow, following routes that suggested he had traveled this way many times before. At the cache location, Lydia found exactly what Agent Reeves had promised: a waterproof container buried beneath a carefully arranged pile of stones. Inside were photographs, documents, and recordings that detailed the scope of the criminal operation with devastating clarity. The evidence showed that the drug trafficking network extended far beyond Copper Ridge, involving corrupt officials throughout the region and generating millions of dollars in illegal profits annually. Most shocking was a list of planned eliminations, people who posed threats to the operation. Thomas's name was on the list, along with dates and methods for his murder. But there were other names as well, including residents of Ridge Valley who had asked too many questions or refused to sell their property. At the bottom of the list was a recent addition that made Lydia's blood freeze. Maria Reeves, DEA agent, eliminate immediately. Agent Reeves had been betrayed by someone within her own organization, someone who had provided information about her investigation to the criminals she was trying to expose. As Lydia photographed the documents with her phone, she realized that she was now in possession of evidence that could destroy the entire criminal network. But she was also carrying information that multiple people had already died to protect. The sound of vehicles in the distance reminded her that time was running out. Crane's people would expect her to make contact soon, and Ida's life depended on Lydia's ability to convince them she was cooperating. But first, she needed to hide the real evidence where even she couldn't be forced to reveal its location. Bruno seemed to understand her intentions. When she gave him the command Agent Reeves had included in her instructions, the donkey immediately began moving toward another location, one that wasn't marked on any of the GPS coordinates Lydia had seen. Agent Reeves had trained her animal to know secrets that existed nowhere else. And now, Bruno was Lydia's only hope for keeping those secrets safe while she tried to save both Ida's life and her own. Bruno led Lydia through terrain she had never seen before, following paths that seemed to exist only in the donkey's trained memory. The animal moved with purpose and confidence, occasionally pausing to check their surroundings before continuing toward a destination that remained unknown to Lydia. After nearly an hour of difficult hiking through snow-covered forest, Bruno stopped at what appeared to be a natural rock formation. But closer examination revealed that some of the stones had been carefully arranged to create a hidden chamber, Agent Reeves' primary evidence cache. Inside the chamber, Lydia found a collection that represented months of dangerous investigative work. Waterproof containers held thousands of photographs documenting the illegal mining operation, detailed financial records showing money laundering through legitimate businesses, and audio recordings of conversations between corrupt officials and criminal leaders. Most importantly, she found Agent Reeves' complete case file, including her analysis of how the drug trafficking network operated and the identities of key participants. The scope was breathtaking. The operation involved not just local criminals, but connections to major cartels and corrupt officials at state and federal levels. One document made Lydia's hands tremble as she read it. Agent Reeves had identified the person within the DEA who had betrayed her investigation. Deputy Director James Morrison, a 20-year veteran who had been providing information to criminals in exchange for substantial financial payments. The betrayal explained how the criminal organization had stayed ahead of law enforcement efforts for so long. They had a source within the DEA who warned them about investigations and helped them eliminate threats before evidence could be gathered. Agent Reeves's final report, dated just days before her disappearance, included a desperate plea for help and a detailed plan for exposing the corruption. She had known she was in danger, but had continued her investigation because she believed the evidence she was gathering could destroy the entire network. Lydia carefully photographed the most critical documents, then made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. She was going to complete Agent Reeves's mission. But first, she had to save Ida and ensure the evidence would survive even if she didn't. Following Agent Reeves's protocols, she activated Bruno's emergency beacon, a device hidden in the donkey's collar that would transmit their location and a distress signal to federal authorities. But given the corruption within the DEA, she couldn't be certain the signal would reach trustworthy agents. The sound of her cell phone ringing in the quiet mountain air startled her. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but she answered anyway. "Ms. Murphy, this is Robert Crane. I trust you've had time to consider our discussion." "I'm considering it." "Excellent. We have Mrs. Fleming in a comfortable location, and she's eager to return home. All that's required is your cooperation in retrieving the materials your husband hid. I need proof that Ida is safe." There was a brief pause. Then Ida's voice came through the phone. "Lydia, I'm all right. They haven't hurt me, but they're very serious about wanting those documents." "Ida, are you—" Crane's voice returned. "As you can hear, Mrs. Fleming as well. But our patience is limited. Where would you like to make the exchange?" Lydia looked at Bruno, who was waiting patiently while she made decisions that would affect both their lives. The donkey had become more than just an animal to her. He represented Agent Reeves's sacrifice and Thomas's determination to expose the truth. The old bridge at Bear Creek. 1 hour. Agreed. And Ms. Murphy, come alone. Any sign of law enforcement or outside assistance will result in unfortunate consequences for Mrs. Fleming. After ending the call, Lydia made her final preparations. She created a decoy package using some of the less critical documents from Agent Reeves's cache. Materials that would appear authentic but wouldn't compromise the most important evidence. The real evidence, the financial records, corruption files, and recordings that could destroy the criminal network. She divided into multiple packages and gave to Bruno, along with instructions Agent Reeves had programmed into the donkeys. Training. If everything went wrong at the exchange, Bruno would take the evidence to locations where federal authorities would eventually find it. Even if Lydia and Ida didn't survive, Scout remained close to her side as they prepared to leave the cache site. The dog's protective instincts were stronger than ever, and Lydia realized he understood they were walking into extreme danger. The journey to Bear Creek took them through terrain that brought back memories of happier times with Thomas. They had hiked these trails together during their early years of marriage, dreaming about their future and planning the adventures they would share. Now she was walking the same paths to confront the people who had murdered him, carrying evidence that might finally bring them to justice. As they approached the old bridge, Lydia could see several vehicles already in position. Crane had brought more men than she expected, at least 8 that she could count. Positioned strategically around the meeting site, the bridge itself was a remnant from the area's mining past, a wooden structure that had once carried equipment and workers across the creek. Time and weather had made it unsafe for heavy use, but it remained sturdy enough for foot traffic. Crane stood in the center of the bridge, his expensive coat a stark contrast to the rugged mountain setting. 2 men flanked him, while others maintained positions that would prevent escape in any direction. Ms. Murphy, thank you for being punctual. Do you have the materials we discussed? Lydia held up the decoy package. I have documents and maps that belong to my husband. Where's Ida? Safe and nearby. May I examine what you've brought? Lydia stepped onto the bridge, acutely aware that Scout and Bruno remained hidden in the tree line where she had left them. If this exchange went badly, they were her only hope for getting the real evidence to authorities. Crane opened the package and examined the contents carefully. His expression remained neutral, but she could see him mentally cataloging what he was seeing. These are interesting, but they're not complete. Where are the financial records your husband removed from our facility? This is everything I found. I don't think so. Crane's voice hardened. Agent Reeves was very thorough in her investigation. She recovered materials your husband hid, and we know those materials included detailed financial documentation. The mention of Agent Reeves confirmed what Lydia had suspected. They knew about the federal investigation and had eliminated the agent just as they had eliminated Thomas. I don't know what you're talking about. Miss Murphy, let me be very clear. We know Agent Maria Reeves used your donkey to transport evidence she gathered during her investigation. We know she cached that evidence in multiple locations throughout these mountains. And we know you've accessed at least one of those caches. Crane signaled to his men, and Lydia heard vehicles approaching from the direction they had come. Her escape route was being cut off. The question is whether you're going to help us recover that evidence voluntarily, or whether we'll need to employ the same methods we used with Agent Reeves to encourage her cooperation. What happened to her? She's in a location where she can't interfere with our business. Alive, but no longer a threat. Crane's smile was cold. We can arrange similar accommodations for you and Mrs. Fleming if you continue to be uncooperative. The realization that Agent Reeves might still be alive sent a surge of hope through Lydia. But it also raised the stakes for everyone involved. If there was a chance to save both Ida and Agent Reeves, she had to find a way to delay the exchange until help could arrive. The evidence you're looking for isn't something I can just hand over. It's hidden in a location that requires special knowledge to access. Then you'll guide us to that location. Not until I see both Ida and Agent Reeves, alive and unharmed. Crane's expression revealed that her knowledge of Agent Reeves' survival had surprised him. You're better informed than we expected. I'm also better prepared than you expected. What does that mean? Lydia pulled out her cell phone and showed him the screen. I've been recording this conversation and transmitting it in real time to federal authorities. They know exactly where we are and what you've admitted to. It was a bluff. She had no such capability. But Crane's reaction told her the threat was credible, enough to concern him. You're lying. Am I? Check your communications equipment. You'll find that someone has been monitoring your radio frequencies for the past hour. One of Crane's men spoke urgently into his radio, then reported back with news that made the criminal leader's face go pale. Federal vehicles approaching from the North Access Road. ETA approximately 10 minutes. Crane's careful planning was unraveling, but Lydia knew that made him more dangerous, not less. Desperate criminals often made violent decisions when they felt cornered. Miss Murphy, you've made this much more complicated than it needed to be. I've made it honest for the first time in 15 years. The sound of helicopters in the distance confirmed that federal law enforcement was indeed approaching. But Lydia realized that 10 minutes might be too long. Crane was already signaling his men to new positions, and their body language suggested they were preparing for a firefight rather than surrender. Change of plans, Crane announced. We're leaving with both women. They'll serve as insurance during our extraction. 2 of his men started moving toward the vehicles where Ida was presumably being held, while others began establishing defensive positions around the bridge area. Lydia realized she had pushed the situation to a crisis point without ensuring that Ida would be safe. Her gamble with the federal authorities had worked, but it might cost her friend's life. That's when Bruno made his appearance. The donkey emerged from the tree line at full gallop, moving with speed and purpose that surprised everyone present. Scout ran alongside him, barking urgently as they charged toward the bridge. But Bruno wasn't running toward the armed men. He was running toward a specific spot on the far side of the creek where Lydia could now see additional movement in the forest. Agent Maria. Reeves stepped out from behind a large pine tree, alive but clearly injured. She was limping heavily, and her left arm hung useless at her side. But she was carrying what appeared to be a federal law enforcement radio. "This is Agent Reeves. DEA, I have visual contact with suspects and hostages at Bear Creek Bridge, requesting immediate tactical support." Crane's men turned their weapons toward Agent Reeves, but she had positioned herself with good cover and clear sightlines to the bridge. More importantly, her radio call confirmed that federal backup was real and imminent. "Agent Reeves," Crane called across the creek, "you're supposed to be dead." "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," she replied. "But your operation is finished, Crane. We have enough evidence to prosecute everyone involved, including your source within the DEA. Deputy Director Morrison will be very disappointed to learn you survived. Morrison is already in federal custody. We identified the leak in our organization and fed him false information about my investigation. Everything you think you know about our operational status is wrong." The revelation that the DEA corruption had been exposed sent visible shockwaves through Crane's team. Several of his men exchanged nervous glances, clearly reconsidering their loyalty to an operation that was collapsing around them. The helicopter sounds were getting closer, and Lydia could now see federal vehicles making their way up the mountain road. But the immediate danger remained critical. Crane still had armed men, and both Ida and Lydia were exposed on the bridge. Agent Reeves called out again. "Crane, you have one opportunity to surrender peacefully. Release the hostages and lay down your weapons, and we'll ensure you're treated according to federal guidelines." "I don't think so. Agent, these women are my ticket out of here. Look around you." "Crane, you're surrounded by federal agents and every escape route is blocked. Your organization is finished. The only question now is whether you want to face prosecution for kidnapping and conspiracy, or kidnapping, conspiracy, and murder." The truth of Agent Reeves's words was becoming evident as additional law enforcement personnel became visible at various points around the creek area. The federal response was comprehensive and professional. They had clearly been planning this operation for some time. But Lydia realized that the success of the federal operation depended on her ability to get Ida to safety before the situation escalated to violence. Crane was trapped, but he still had hostages and armed men who might choose to fight rather than surrender. Scout had positioned himself between Lydia and Crane's men, his protective instincts fully engaged. Bruno had moved to a position where he could potentially block access to the vehicles where Ida was being held. The animals seemed to understand that their humans were in danger, and they were prepared to help however they could. As the sound of approaching helicopters grew louder, Lydia realized that the next few minutes would determine whether her quest for justice ended in triumph or tragedy. Agent Reeves was alive, federal help was arriving, and the evidence needed to expose the criminal network was safely hidden. But Ida Fleming's life still hung in the balance, and Robert Crane was the kind of man who would rather destroy everything than accept defeat. The final confrontation was about to begin. Scout paced nervously, his usual calm demeanor replaced by an alertness that suggested he too felt the danger surrounding them. The first federal helicopter appeared over the tree line just as Crane made his decision to escalate rather than surrender. He barked orders to his men, and Lydia could see them moving to defensive positions while two others headed toward the vehicles where Ida was being held. "Agent Reeves!" Crane shouted across the creek. "I'm leaving with both hostages. Any attempt to stop me will result in their deaths." But Agent Reeves had been planning for this possibility. As Crane's men moved toward their vehicles, Bruno suddenly bolted from his position and ran directly toward the SUV where Ida was detained. The donkey's unexpected charge spooked the guards, causing them to stumble and lose precious seconds in their extraction plan. Scout joined the attack, using his military-trained instincts to harass and confuse the armed men without exposing himself to direct gunfire. The dog's speed and agility made him a difficult target while he disrupted their formations. Lydia saw her opportunity. While Crane's attention was focused on controlling the chaos around the vehicles, she slipped off the bridge and began working her way toward where Agent Reeves had taken cover. "Stay down," Agent Reeves called to her. "Federal tactical teams are moving into position, but this could get dangerous fast." The sound of helicopter rotors was now deafening as Federal aircraft established a perimeter around the entire area. Loudspeakers began broadcasting surrender demands, but Crane's response was to order his men to open fire on the aircraft. The gunshots echoed off the mountain walls, and Lydia realized that the situation had escalated beyond negotiation. This was now a tactical operation where the primary goal was minimizing casualties while preventing the criminals from escaping. Agent Reeves activated her radio again. "Command, this is Reeves. Suspects have initiated hostile fire. Hostages are still in danger. Request immediate intervention." "Copy that, Agent Reeves. Tactical teams are moving to secure hostages. Maintain your position and provide support as able." Through the trees, Lydia could see Federal agents in tactical gear moving with practiced precision toward the bridge area. Their approach was coordinated and professional, but she knew that Crane's desperation made the situation extremely volatile. Bruno had succeeded in creating enough confusion to delay the vehicle extraction, but now he was trapped near the SUV with Ida inside. The donkey was trying to position himself between the armed men and the vehicle. Using his body as a shield, Scout had taken cover behind a fallen log, but continued to bark and harass anyone who tried to approach the vehicles. His presence was keeping the guards from establishing clear fields of fire. Crane himself remained on the bridge, using Lydia's abandoned position as cover while he tried to coordinate his men's response to the Federal assault. But his organization was clearly unprepared for a full-scale law enforcement operation. "This is FBI Special Agent Jennifer Walsh," came a voice over powerful loudspeakers. "You are surrounded and have no escape routes. Release the hostages immediately and surrender your weapons." Crane's response was to grab one of his men's rifles and begin firing toward the Federal positions. His shots were wild and desperate, but they demonstrated that he had no intention of surrendering peacefully. The Federal tactical response was swift and overwhelming. Agents moved from multiple directions simultaneously, using advanced equipment and coordinated tactics to minimize the criminals' ability to resist effectively. But Lydia's attention remained focused on the SUV where Ida was trapped. Through the vehicle's windows, she could see her friend's frightened face, and she knew that the elderly woman was terrified by the gunfire and chaos around her. Agent Reeves had begun moving toward the vehicle as well, despite her injuries. "I'm going to try to get to the hostage," she called to Lydia. "Can you provide distraction?" Lydia looked around desperately for something she could do to help. Then she remembered Thomas's compass, still in her pocket along with the wooden cross. Thomas had taught her basic wilderness survival skills, including how to use reflected sunlight for signaling. She pulled out the compass and angled it to catch the winter sun, directing the reflected light toward the guards near the SUV. The sudden bright flashes in their eyes caused them to duck and shield their faces, providing Agent Reeves with the opening she needed. The injured Federal agent moved with remarkable speed, despite her damaged arm, reaching the vehicle just as backup agents arrived from the opposite direction. The guards found themselves surrounded and quickly surrendered, rather than face overwhelming odds. Ida was pulled from the SUV unharmed, but shaken. Agent Reeves immediately began escorting her toward the Federal command position where medical personnel were standing by. But the main confrontation was still unresolved. Crane remained on the bridge with several heavily armed men. and they showed no signs of surrendering, despite being completely outnumbered. The Federal Tactical Commander's voice came over the loudspeakers again. "Mr. Crane, your associates have surrendered, and your hostages have been secured. You have no leverage remaining. Surrender now, and no one else needs to be hurt." Crane's response revealed the depth of his desperation. "I'm not going to federal prison for the rest of my life. If I'm going down, I'm taking as many of you with me as possible." The threat of a final, violent confrontation hung over the mountain valley like a dark cloud. Federal agents had successfully rescued Ida and secured most of the criminal organization, but Crane himself remained dangerous and unpredictable. Scout and Bruno had both taken shelter near Agent Reeves's position, their animal instincts telling them that the immediate danger had passed, but that greater threats still remained. As federal agents prepared for the final phase of the operation, Lydia realized that her journey from isolated widow to active participant in exposing criminal corruption was about to reach its climax. The evidence she and Agent Reeves had gathered would ensure that justice was finally served for Thomas's murder. But first they had to survive the desperate acts of men who had nothing left to lose. Agent Reeves had reached the emergency beacon hidden in Bruno's collar and was now coordinating directly with federal tactical teams through advanced communication equipment. Despite her injuries, she maintained professional focus while directing the final phase of the operation. "Command, this is Reeves. Primary hostage is secure, but suspect Crane remains armed and dangerous on the bridge with at least 3 associates. Recommend gas deployment to force surrender without additional casualties." "Copy that, Agent Reeves." "Gas deployment authorized. All personnel take appropriate precautions." Lydia watched as federal agents prepared specialized equipment while maintaining their positions around the bridge. The operation had the precision of a military exercise, but she knew that Crane's desperation made the outcome far from certain. "Mrs. Murphy," Agent Reeves called to her, "I need you to activate Bruno's final protocol. There's evidence cached in a location only he can find, and we need to secure it before Crane's associates attempt to destroy it." "What kind of protocol?" "Code word Sanctuary. Bruno will take you to the primary evidence cache that contains the original financial records and recordings. That evidence is crucial for prosecuting the entire network." Lydia approached Bruno carefully. The donkey had remained remarkably calm, despite the gunfire and chaos, as if his training had prepared him for exactly this type of situation. "Sanctuary," she said clearly. Bruno immediately began moving away from the bridge area, heading uphill toward terrain that would be difficult for vehicles to navigate. Scout automatically took his position as escort, understanding that they were embarking on another important mission. Agent Reeves continued coordinating with tactical teams, while Lydia followed Bruno toward the hidden cache. The donkey's pace was urgent but controlled, following paths that suggested months of careful preparation by Agent Reeves. Behind them, the confrontation at the bridge was reaching its climax. Federal agents had deployed tear gas, and the sounds of gunfire indicated that Crane and his remaining men were making their final stand, but Lydia's focus remained on completing the mission that had cost Thomas his life and nearly cost Agent Reeves hers. The evidence Bruno was leading her to would ensure that everyone involved in the criminal conspiracy faced justice. The cache site was hidden in a rock formation that looked completely natural, but had been carefully modified to create a secure storage space. Inside, Lydia found containers holding the most damaging evidence against the criminal network: original financial documents, recorded conversations, and photographic proof of corruption that reached to the highest levels. Most importantly, she found Agent Reeves' complete case file documenting 15 years of criminal activity, including detailed evidence about Thomas's murder and the systematic elimination of other potential witnesses. As she gathered the evidence, Lydia heard the distant sound of helicopters and realized that medical evacuation aircraft were arriving. The tactical operation at the bridge had apparently concluded. Though she couldn't tell from her current position what the outcome had been, Bruno led her back toward the command area, using a different route that avoided the bridge entirely. The donkey's training included multiple escape routes and contingency plans that demonstrated Agent Reeves's thorough preparation for various scenarios. When they reached the federal command post, Lydia found a scene of controlled activity. Medical personnel were treating several injured individuals, including Agent Reeves, whose arm was being stabilized for transport to a hospital. Ida sat on a folding chair with a blanket around her shoulders, talking to federal agents who were taking her statement. She looked shaken but unharmed, and her face lit up with relief when she saw Lydia approaching. "Command, this is Special Agent Walsh," came a voice over the radio. "Suspects Crane and 3 associates are in custody. No federal casualties, minor injuries only. Site is secure." The announcement brought visible relief to everyone in the command area. The criminal organization that had operated with impunity for 15 years had finally been dismantled, and the people responsible for Thomas's death were in federal custody. Agent Reeves managed a tired smile as Lydia handed over the evidence from the final cache. "This completes the case file. We now have enough evidence to prosecute not only the primary conspirators, but also every corrupt official who enabled their operation. What happens now?" "Now you get to go home and live the life your husband wanted you to have, one where you don't have to fear for your safety or wonder whether justice will ever be served." As federal agents began organizing evidence and preparing for the complex prosecution that would follow, Lydia realized that her ordeal was finally ending. The truth about Thomas's death had been exposed, and the people responsible would face the consequences of their actions. Scout and Bruno had both played crucial roles in the successful operation, and they stood beside her now, as if understanding that their mission was complete. The animals had formed an unlikely partnership in service of justice, and their loyalty had helped make everything possible. Doc Brennan arrived with the medical evacuation team, his relief evident as he confirmed that both Lydia and Ida were unharmed. The elderly physician had risked his own safety to contact federal authorities, and his actions had been crucial to the operation's success. As helicopters prepared to transport prisoners and evidence back to federal facilities, Lydia took a moment to process what had happened. She had begun this journey as an isolated widow, trying to understand why a mysterious donkey had appeared at her cabin. She was ending it as someone who had helped expose a major criminal conspiracy and ensured that justice was finally served for her. Husband's murder, the wooden cross in her pocket, reminded her that Thomas's courage lived on, and that some fights were worth the risk when the cause was just and the need was great. 6 months later, spring had returned to Ridge Valley with a beauty that seemed more vivid than Lydia could remember from previous years. The mountain meadows were filled with wildflowers, and the sound of clear water flowing over rocks in Bear Creek carried a music that spoke of renewal and hope. Lydia stood at the overlook, where she and Thomas used to watch the sunrise, but she was not alone. Beside her grazed Reeves. She had renamed the donkey in honor of Agent Maria Reeves, who had made a full recovery from her injuries and received a commendation for her courageous investigation. Scout lay at her feet, content and peaceful in a way that reflected the security that had returned to their mountain home. The dog had grown especially attached to Reeves the donkey, as if understanding that their partnership had been forged in service to something larger than themselves. The granite memorial stone at her feet bore simple but powerful words. Thomas Murphy, beloved husband and courageous truth-seeker. Agent Maria Reeves, whose dedication to justice made the truth possible. Their sacrifice revealed that some battles are worth fighting, and some secrets refuse to stay buried. The criminal organization that had controlled Copper Ridge for 15 years was now completely dismantled. Robert Crane and his associates had been sentenced to life in prison for conspiracy, drug trafficking, and multiple counts of murder. Deputy Director James Morrison, the corrupt DEA official who had betrayed Agent Reeves, faced his own lengthy prison sentence. Sheriff Patterson had been arrested and convicted of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. His replacement, elected by the people of Ridge Valley, was a former federal agent who understood the importance of honest law enforcement in a community that had suffered under corruption for too long. The illegal mining operation had been permanently shut down, and the land around Copper Ridge had been designated as a federal wilderness preserve. No mining would ever again disturb the mountains where Thomas had died seeking the truth. But perhaps the most meaningful change was what had happened to the community of Ridge Valley itself. The federal prosecutions and the exposure of the criminal conspiracy had brought the residents together in a way that years of ordinary life had never accomplished. Sam Torres had decided not to sell his store after all, and the business was thriving as never before. Tourists and journalists had come to learn about the community that had stood up to criminal intimidation, and many had stayed to become part of the growing population. Doc Brennan had been appointed interim sheriff during the transition period, and his medical practice had expanded to serve the growing community. He had also begun working with federal authorities to identify and treat victims of industrial accidents from illegal operations throughout the region. Ida Fleming had become something of a celebrity, giving interviews to journalists who wanted to understand how ordinary people had found the courage to challenge powerful criminal organizations. But she remained the same caring neighbor who had risked her life to help Lydia uncover the truth. Most importantly for Lydia, the federal investigation had officially exonerated Thomas of any wrongdoing and recognized him as a whistleblower whose efforts to expose criminal activity had cost him his life. His death was no longer recorded as an industrial accident, but as a homicide committed to silence a courageous witness. The legal resolution had provided closure, but the emotional healing had come through reconnecting with her community. Lydia had begun offering veterinary services to local residents, using skills she had developed during her nursing career and her years of caring for mountain wildlife. Her cabin had become an unofficial gathering place for community meetings and social events. The isolation that had once defined her life had been replaced by meaningful relationships with neighbors who had become family. Agent Maria Reeves had visited several times during her recovery, and the two women had developed a friendship based on their shared experience of seeking justice despite overwhelming odds. Agent Reeves had returned to active duty, but made it clear that she considered Ridge Valley her second home. The evidence you and Bruno helped me gather didn't just solve one case. Agent Reeves had explained during her most recent visit. It exposed a pattern of corruption that we've been able to use to investigate similar operations throughout the region. Your husband's courage started something that will continue helping people for years to come. The financial compensation from federal seizure of criminal assets had allowed Lydia to establish the Thomas Murphy Memorial Fund, which provided assistance to families of whistleblowers and witnesses who faced retaliation for speaking truth to power. The fund had already helped dozens of families, and Lydia found deep satisfaction in turning her personal tragedy into a source of support for others facing similar challenges. But it was the quiet moments that brought her the greatest peace. Evening walks with Scout and Reeves through the meadows where wildflowers bloomed. Morning coffee on her porch while watching the sunrise paint the mountain peaks in shades of gold and pink. Conversations with neighbors who had become friends, sharing stories and laughter over simple meals. She had learned that healing from grief didn't mean forgetting or moving on. It meant finding ways to honor the past while building a future that reflected the values and courage of those who had been lost. Thomas's wedding ring had been returned to her after the federal prosecutions concluded. She wore it on a chain around her neck, close to her heart, where it served as a reminder that love transcends death and that the bonds formed in life continue to provide strength and guidance long after physical presence ends. The wooden cross he had carved for her remained in her pocket, carried everywhere as a tangible connection to the faith and hope that had sustained her through the darkest periods of her journey. As the sun crested the mountains on this perfect spring morning, Lydia felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected path her life had taken. She had begun as an isolated widow, trying to save an injured donkey, and she had discovered a community, a purpose, and a renewed faith in the possibility that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences when they chose courage over comfort. Reeves, the donkey, lifted his head from grazing and looked toward the trail leading back to the cabin, as if suggesting it was time to return home. Scout stretched and stood, ready for whatever adventure the day might bring. Together, the three of them walked back toward the cabin where it all began, carrying with them the knowledge that some journeys end exactly where they need to, and that the courage to seek truth can transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. The mountains of Colorado held many secrets, but the most important ones, love, courage, justice, and hope, had been revealed by a woman, her dog, and a donkey who had brought them a message that transcended death and made redemption possible.